There we go. So anyway, thank you for coming, Carl. I know, what time is it over there right now?
Oh, it's
three and a
just
half?
after 2 o'clock my time, PM, London time.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, we did the your first book was In Praise of Slowness. I found you with Boulder. But you've written a couple other books too, right? Isn't that correct?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, my second book was called Under Pressure, and it's about children and parenting and education and kind of through a slow lens. And this third book is called The Slow Fix, and that's about solving problems in every walk of life, from business to relationships,
Mhm.
also with a slow vibe. So I kind of think those are my first three books, the Slow Trilogy, and now Boulder is sort of a new, the one you've got there is the new kind of new chapter, if you like, for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I've actually shared this with some friends, and actually physically given them the book and said, you should read this.
Mm.
So you wrote the book this book back in 2018. That's when it came out.
It came out, yeah, or well, yeah, beginning of 2000, it was actually 2019 it came out, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Copyright, I guess, was 2018, but this is going to kind of jump. This question is kind of jumping ahead of things, but since you wrote that, have you done any more like interviewing in that area? I guess I'm wanting to hear what you have to say about what's currently going on with this mind shift, the aging mind shift.
Yeah, I think that what I've seen in the last couple of years is a kind of acceleration and shift that I'm describing in Boulder, which is the tectonic plates, I think, are shifting the culture as people move away from the old tired tropes about aging, which is that, aging is somehow a shameful thing. It's a curse, it's a disease, it's all downhill from wherever, 35, 40, 45, 50, wherever you draw the line, right? It's all bad, right? Every birthday after a certain point makes us less attractive, less productive, less happy, less relevant, less ourselves, which is patently untrue, which is kind of the whole ageist, if you like, ageism, right? That kind of downbeat stereotypes about aging and all tied up with the cult of youth. That's what I'm trying to take down in Boulder. And in the 2 years since the book has hit the shelves, I've seen some really big changes actually in the culture in general. I think the UN has launched just quite recently a sort of campaign against ageism around the world. A lot of big international photo development agencies now are pushing for a wider, richer, more nuanced, more upbeat depictions of people in later life. You're starting to see all kinds of new roles from Netflix to Hollywood for older actors, especially for older women actors, like actresses, female actors.
Oh, wow.
Advertising is also starting to, because I do a lot of public speaking and events with so on, I hear this from companies that they're very much aware that they were getting it wrong before, and that there's a different way to think about aging and talk about aging and portraying aging. And so I see many, many changes, actually. I feel actually today more confident, more hopeful than I did when the book first came out a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Just from a personal standpoint, it's amazing to me how my own brain thinks about myself getting older, that I can't seem to get that 65-year thing, out of your brain that, oh, I'm 65, I should be retiring, or, everybody's retiring. I want to get that noise out of my head as much as possible. But so culturally, with that shift that you're talking about, in the news and advertising and everything else, and the book, that's going to be a great service, great help for everybody.
Yeah, and we need it urgently. And the way I think of it is breaking the link between age and stage, right? I think that we kind of welded ourselves into this 3-stage path of life. That life, and this has been a good century and a half, we've seen it this way. Perhaps you could argue even longer. That early life, the first stage is learning, second stage is earning, third stage is resting, right? Which, maybe made sense for perhaps the first 2/3 of the 20th century, but in a world where people are living, most people under 20 now stand a very good chance, at least in the developed world, and of living to past 90, maybe even 100, right? So the idea that you would lock yourself into this rigid life path where you stop learning at 20, you only earn for 30 years, and then what are you going to do with those last 40 years, right? Just stop? Doesn't make sense anymore. So that's a big part of this conversation, is how we tear up the old formula, the old recipe, and invent a new one. And I think that's already happening. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say, get that idea of the 65 out of our heads, because that's really what this boils down to, is getting the idea of what one age means out of our heads, because 65 means a million different things to a million different people, right? And some 65-year-olds will, maybe for them it's going to be right to stop working, or maybe some will be actually quite unwell in a wheelchair, but other 65-year-olds will be launching businesses or climbing mountains, right? So this is the way I think about it, is that it's really about freeing people up to define what every age, whether you're 25, 35, 55, 75, 105, what it means for you in that moment, rather than feeling you've got to buy into a whole panoply of stereotypes that lock you into one particular way of being. And I think that's very much part of the whole culture in general, is people defining themselves as they see fit. So it fits a broader shift in the culture too, right? To self-identification and all those things that are sometimes seen as a bit woke or a bit left-wing, but the idea that people can forge their own path. I mean, in a way, it's a very frontier American idea, isn't it? It's kind of a rugged individualist principle of saying, you know what, I'm going to go out, find my patch of land and make my life on it, right? It doesn't matter what my birth certificate says or what my surname sounds like. What matters is what I do on the ground in my own life. And I think that's a good way of thinking about aging for all of us, however old we are.
Yeah, I would agree. Can you tell me what it was like to actually meet these people that you interviewed for the book?
Well, what I wanted to avoid was writing a book where I didn't want to write a whole catalog of look at amazing people in later life, because in a way, I sort of think that can end up being a little bit ageist too, because that's denying the fact that not everybody can run a marathon at 85, right? Some people can, and everyone can aspire to that, but not all of us will be able to do it. And so it's kind of, I didn't want to create that kind of book or that sort of message. But of course, in the message I wanted to create, which was sort of what I've said before, which is, be the best you could, do everything you can to invest in your own learning, your own health, your own social networks, all the good things that will help you be the best version of yourself at any age. Do all of that. And then as you move through your life, decide what works for you in that moment, and don't feel ashamed or guilty or envious of what other people, because it's your life. You are the person of whatever, 63, 89, 42. It's you now. That's the key thing to remember. So I guess I sort of feel like that's where we need to be heading, is that kind of freedom. But you asked me about how I felt about meeting these people. I, of course, found it immensely uplifting, right? And also a relief. I've got to be honest, a relief, because I went into this whole project as a card-carrying ageist, right? I had a very bleak view of growing older. I mean, I've always had it, I think. I remember in my 20s thinking, man, I gotta get all this stuff down now, because when I hit 30, that's it, right? That's really genuinely, I remember I've even seen writings in my diary when I used to keep a diary of that. And then I got to 30 and realized, you know what? Actually, that's fine. Things are pretty good. But I thought, oh no, well, 40, game over, right? That's really the end of it. You're ready for the scrap heap. Got to 40 and I thought, I actually kind of feel like I'm on the top of my game right now. Then it was 50, and now I'm what, 53, and I still feel, this is pretty good. I'm really pleased with where I am and what I've done, and I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Yeah.
So for me, I kind of only got to the stage I am now of not worrying and not feeling bad and stuff. Part of it was meeting people like that. I guess they weren't really on my radar so much, and just realizing that, who's it that said that C.S. Lewis, right? The author said once, you're never too old to dream a new dream or find a new love. And that's C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia in his 50s and actually found the love of his life in his 50s. And wow, is that really true? And then, of course, you go out and meet, the more people you meet like that, the easier it becomes to believe that it is true. And to see, not believe, because that makes it sound like it might not be true. It is true. And so I found meeting these people really really inspiring, and it just helped me move away from my own ageism, right? And to embrace the whole idea of the book and actually believe it, right? Not just write it on a piece of paper or a laptop screen, but actually believe it and live it. So
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think about when I think of the old people that are older, I guess that's just gonna say it, is that they're walking around with so much wisdom that they could share with those of us that might not have as much wisdom. But that the younger people of today have this great opportunity to garner that wisdom early in their lives, because we're living in a time when there are so many older folks that
yeah.
are, probably very open and willing to share, their life.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, that's one thing I look back, one of my regrets in my own early life and career is not ever having a mentor or somebody looking, who was 20, 30 years ahead of me, perhaps in the same career, that I could have tapped into that experience, that understanding, that big picture grasp of what the trajectory of a writer or journalist's life might look like, and so on. And I think that, as you say, we're because the planet is getting older, the population is older every day, we have this incredible, almost limitless resource of people who walking around with all this life experience that can be tapped into. And actually forward-looking companies more and more are doing that, right? I mean, they're setting up mentoring programs, they're bringing back people to work as consultants after they've passed official retirement age. I think I saw recently that in the UK, 1 in 4 people who retire now are doing what they call unretiring. So they retire, and then within 5 years, they come back in some capacity, same company, maybe same industry, maybe something totally different. And that's, I mean, the OECD, all the big, big smart economic foundations say the same thing, that there's a huge potential here for cultural understanding, economic smarts, and creativity and innovation and joining the dots thinking. It's right there if we can tap into it, if we pull down some of these ageist blinders, right? The stereotypes that tell us, like Mark Zuckerberg, who famously said on a stage a few years back, he said, young people are just smarter. You think, whoa, really? I mean, many young people are smart, right? And not all old people are wise, right? So it's, again, I always feel you've got to avoid putting everybody from one generation or one age group into a box. We're all hugely different. In fact, when you compare across the generations, there's much more variety within an age cohort than there is, between, say, boomers and millennials, right? It's within millennials and within boomers, you're going to find way more variety than looking at up and down in a kind of crude generational comparison. So, I think that there's so much out there that we can all benefit from, and that's why a big part of the final chapter of Boulder looks at the importance of mixing the generations again, because that's one of the secrets to breaking down ageism, right? It's bringing the generations back together, and again, for obvious reasons, one of the best ways to erode stereotypes is getting to know the people being stereotyped, right? So if you bring the generations together, people suddenly don't feel, oh, game over at 40, right? They think, actually, that 43-year-old I've just met, that's pretty all right. Or here's somebody at 70 who's actually found a new way of being in the world, a new hobby, or is learning something new, and their face is alight, and it's so exciting, and I'm feeling their energy off them and stuff. So I think mixing up the generations is going to be one of the big challenges, because we've created a society where we're in age silos, often walled off. Just think of retirement communities. By their very nature, they're walling off people of a certain age from everyone else. So I'm not personally not a big fan of that approach to living in later life. I think wherever possible now, we need to be looking at all stages of life, mixing everybody together as much as possible.
Yeah, and I know some senior living residents are doing just that. Architects are designing senior living with apartments where younger people can be right there, actually maybe even part of that same building.
Yeah,
that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I look at and write about in Boulder, isn't it? Is a Dutch nursing home that kind of is seen as a pioneer of that, where they opened up rooms, free accommodation for students to live among the residents of the home, and just completely transformed the whole atmosphere. I mean, everybody, the older residents became healthier, happier, more open, and they began launching companies, and it was just such an extraordinary atmosphere to be in, so good for the spirit to be there. And I've been in a lot of, what are we calling them now? Nursing homes. I mean, in Britain, we call them, what do we call them? There's various terms, social care and all that. Many of the homes I've been in have been quite depressing. I mean, just, grim. Whereas this one there was a lightness to it. And I think a big part of that was that sense of everybody together, right? In this great long journey of life. We're all at different stages, but here we all are sharing our stories from wherever we are on the continuum. And it just, it put a spring in my step.
It makes total sense to do that.
It's what human beings have always done, right? You go back to our ancestors. Everybody was sitting around the campfire together, right? Hunting together, working in the fields together. Everybody of all ages was together. And in some cultures in the world, you still do see some of that more residually left behind than you do, say, in where you are, like in the Anglo-Saxon world here in Britain and North America and stuff. But even in, I mean, I do a lot of work in the Spanish-speaking world and in Spain and so on. And when Boulder came out in Spanish, it was interesting to me because every journalist said the same thing to me. He said, because I know Spain well enough not to fall into that stereotype of saying, oh, the Spanish, they all mix, because they've moved away from that as well. They still keep some of it, the fiestas, you get people, and the family's more central. So there is more intergenerational mixing, I would say, in Spain than in the English-speaking world. But it's still much less than it was, and it's not enough. And every journalist, as I say, in Spain came up to me and said the same thing. They said, that's the thing that really hit home. And for us, I think in Spain, the most in your book was the fact that we're kind of losing that, or we've lost a lot of it. And we are following this, I don't want to call it the Anglo-Saxon model, the kind of global economy model, maybe, whatever it is, late capitalism, consumerism, where everybody's an individual and we're kind of in our own silos and we're cut off from each other age-wise and stuff. So anyway, lots to unpack there.
So can you tell me just about can you talk about going to this is one of my favorite stories in the book, was you going to the racetrack, the indoor racetrack.
Oh, yeah.
That you couldn't tell. That was what was extraordinary. You couldn't tell that they were older gentlemen and young ladies until they took their gear off.
Yeah, that was a real moment of revelation for me. And it was the moment that kind of propelled me to carry on writing the book, because not long before that, I tried on what's called an aging suit, which it's a kind of complicated, sort of like a kind of, you look like RoboCop. It's lots of things that get strapped on and weights, and they mess up your eyes and block your hearing. And the idea is it adds 30 years to your life, right? Of course, what it does is it gives you every possible ailment instantly, right? You get the full English breakfast all on one plate, right? Whereas in real life, obviously, not everybody gets every problem of old age, and you don't get it instantly, and and plus you have time psychologically to get used to it. In this suit, it's instant. And it was such a trauma to wear this suit. I mean, I just felt it was awful. It was horrendous. I took the suit off and I thought, here I am thinking of writing a book about, telling a better story about aging. Aging sucks. It's the worst thing. I was right to be ageist, and I just thought it was awful. But then I found myself a week later, as you say, at this velodrome in northern France for a masters cycling tournament where cyclists come from all over Europe. And as you say, so there are cyclists from the age, a master starts at 35, but the oldest ones would be, 75, 80 even, I think. And it was just extraordinary because you saw them up there on the thing, whizzing around in their Lycra and their $10,000 bikes. And you literally could not tell who was what age, right? Because they had the helmets on, they were all pedaling away, the legs pumping away like cartoon characters. And the only way you could tell were two ways. One was obviously when they took their helmets off and you saw their faces, but the other was the times, right? So if you looked at the times, obviously the younger you went, but in cohorts of 5 years, the average time would be faster, because that's just what happens. Whatever you do, however many spin classes you go to and however many goji berries you eat, your body is going to work less well over time. That's just a fact of life, right? And you only need to ask professional athletes, right? Who isn't anyone else, is their job, their vocation. They've got all nutrition and everything behind them to keep them at peak. And in a top sports peak, athletes peak, they're on the way down from their 30s, right? And no athletes hit the same at 50 as he or she was at 25. It's just never going to happen, right?
Yeah. It's just
but still, these people at the velodrome were just unbelievable. They were breaking records. Some of them were actually getting faster, as they got older because they were starting later in life. And it was just made me think that aging suit was a distorted picture of things. And it was, I loved going there. Actually, I wanted to get on. Everybody's bike is so expensive. They wouldn't let me get on the track and try, but I was very tempted because I was just so swept up in the excitement of it all. It was great fun.
Yeah. That was probably my favorite to hear about that. Well, because I like to cycle,
Yeah.
So we got mentors, living together, medical and technology. That really is changing. Like you started to talk about, kids that are in their 20s or younger, they could blow right through 100.
Yeah.
On Time magazine, I think it was a year ago or so, there was a picture of a baby, and they said this baby could live to be 125. Could become very normal. What are your thoughts on that?
I've got some doubts about that. I mean, I drilled down into the science. I think we're still a long way away from I think that happening regularly. And there's a whole wing of the longevity movement which believes that, the real outriders believe that the first person to live to 500 is walking the earth and all that stuff. And I'm just not sure if the science stacks. It certainly doesn't stack up yet. I'm not sure, to be honest, if it ever will. I think we probably will always die, and we will probably always die around. We may be able to eke it out to sort of 100 as an average, perhaps. I could be wrong, right? I mean, no one really knows, but it's still the realm of science fiction at the moment. But the basic fact, which is just numbers, is that we are, compared to where we were 30, 40 years ago, we have stretched it out, right? So we've got all these extra years to play with. And for many of us, those years are going to be in good health. So it's kind of, what do you do with that science culturally? How do we respond socially, psychologically in our own heads? How do we make something of this longevity revolution, right? And that's kind of what Boulder's all about, right? That's the kind of work that I'm doing, is trying to puzzle out what these things, what we do, what we need. I think you talked about, mentoring and mixed generations. I think we need to rethink the around aging. That's a big part of it too. I think we maybe need to think about social rituals, right? We've got things like, retirement is a kind of ritual, the golden handshake and all that. The 50th birthday. And in Japan, I think it is, they've got a tradition where when people have their 60th birthday, there's a particular, I've forgotten the name of it, there's a particular word for it, a Japanese word. And it's kind of a sort of, you've arrived at this stage and now you're entering a new phase where, not a downhill phase, but just a new phase of expansiveness, and you might do something different and stuff. And it's a celebration. And we don't tend to have that in the West too much, those social rituals. We tend to regard those birthdays we make fun of them, or we hide them, or we lie about them, right? We get birthday cards to say, oh no, you're 50, right? Or happy birthday, old fart, right? So I'm not po-faced. I think it's okay to laugh about stuff. Of course it is, but I think there's maybe just a bit too much of that going on. And it would be useful to have maybe some kind of social norm or ritual that just kind of said, here's a pivot moment in our lives. Look back, take stock. Where are you now? Where do you think you want to go the next 10 years, next 20 years, or whatever? Could be useful to come up with something like that as well.
Yeah, I think that, if somebody's thinking about retirement, I think that what they may want to consider is to really think about what they love.
Yeah.
What do they love to do?
Yeah.
If they can tap into that, and whether they monetize it or not, that will give them a lot of runway, let's call it.
It will, because we know, the Japanese, going back to the Japanese again, but the term ikigai, right? This idea of having some kind of purpose or some animating force in your life that gets you, the thing that puts fire in your belly and gets you out of bed with a spring in your step in the morning, right? Yeah. And that's not something you want to wait till you're in your 60s to find. We should all be trying to find that at any age.
Yeah.
But I think particularly maybe we perhaps feel we've got more room to maneuver to follow it or find it. We maybe have a bit more, we will have more self-knowledge in our 60s than we do in our 20s. So, there are reasons why it might be easier to find that ikigai later on. But whatever age you are at, it's something I think we should all aspire to, because it's,
Right.
well, it just makes you happier. But there's also research that shows if you do have some kind of meaning or purpose in your life, that's good for you. That's good for your health, right? There's nothing worse than having no purpose. I mean, people look at what's happened with COVID, right? I mean, just the loss of social contact, but also the kind of monotony and the feeling of hopelessness that people are feeling. I mean, I think people have lost a sense of purpose often in towards the end of this pandemic, a year in. So yeah, purpose is a hugely important thing, definitely.
Yep. So, as we come to the end here, is there anything that you want to say to finish up here?
Yeah, I'd say two things. One is that every age can be magnificent, right? Every age can be. Every age has its pros and cons, but we can only make the most of whatever age we are if we embrace it, right? Embrace the present without pining for the past and shrinking in horror from the future, right? And I think that comes down to thinking about life as a series of opening doors rather than closing them, right? Embracing it kind of as an adventure. I sort of am more and more thinking of it as like a video game, where each time you get through a level, you get from level 29 to 30, and you're leaving some stuff behind, but you're carrying things forward because there's going to be new adventures in 30. You're bringing all that experience with you. And in a video game, there's something exciting about moving. You say, yeah, I've reached 34. Now I've reached level 52, right? And rather than the way we think about aging, which is, oh no, I'm 52, right? And I sort of feel like that may be the way to think about it, as a kind of video game, or a game, it doesn't have to be video, where you're progressing through and you're getting better and better. David Bowie, had a great quote. He said, aging is an extraordinary process by which you become the person you always should have been. And I think in a sense, I love that quote. It kind of gets at something that I think you only start to realize later on in life, which is that it's almost like as a human being, you start off with this mold of clay and you're just constantly chipping and sculpting and shaving bits off till you get to the core, you get to the essence of who you are. And that takes time. That's what a life is. It's to get to the end in that Bowie sense and be the person you always should have been. Yeah. And that's, I think, perhaps in some ways the greatest gift of aging. So whatever age you are, 25, 35, 45, 85, whatever, own that age, and then just simply go out there and, show the world what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, if there's nothing else, I guess we'll call this a wrap.
Well, I'll just throw in one thing, which is a simple how to find me, which is I'm very easy to find online. I've got a single link which goes to everything from books to courses to videos and stuff. And it's my full name, carlhonore.info. So carlhonore.info, and it's all there.
Okay, great. That's awesome. We'll put that in the show notes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, as well, and put some links to the book as well. But thank you so much again for
thanks
your time, and wish you well. And we'll talk again soon.
I hope so. Always a pleasure to chat, Ray.
All right.
See you next time. Cheers.
Nice to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.